Lieutenant Sarah Hayes stepped off the transport van and onto the sprawling grounds of the naval base. The sun was rising, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold, and the air was filled with the familiar mix of sea breeze and the metallic scent of machinery. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. It had been years since she was last on this base. Years filled with challenging assignments, dangerous missions, and long nights far away from home. But today, she was back, and the base she once knew so well felt both familiar and strange at the same time. As she walked toward the main building to check in, she noticed the small groups of sailors and officers milling about. Some were heading to drills, others chatting casually. But then she felt it, curious, judgmental eyes on her. Sarah didn't immediately know why, but as she lifted her gaze, she realized it was her tattoo. Her forearm bore an intricate design, a mix of symbols, lines, and patterns, each carrying a story, a memory, a life once shared. To her, it was a tribute, a silent honor to her fallen comrades. But to some on the base it was different, unusual, maybe even shocking. She tried to ignore it at first, focusing on her steps and the rhythm of her boots on the concrete. Yet whispers started to spread. A group of young officers glanced at her arm, snickering quietly. One muttered something about it looking unprofessional, and Sarah caught the corner of a smile from another, clearly thinking it was a joke. The laughter was low, not loud enough to confront directly, but loud enough for her to notice. She felt a brief sting of annoyance, a flicker of irritation, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She had learned long ago that patience and composure were as important as courage in the field. Walking into the main building, Sarah approached the reception desk. A clerk looked up, blinking in surprise at her appearance. Not because her uniform was out of place, it was immaculate, every badge in its proper place, but because of the tattoo that peeked out from her sleeve. Some people had a hard time separating personal expression from professional identity, and this was one of those moments. Sarah handed over her identification and orders, keeping her tone polite but steady. "Lieutenant Hayes reporting back," she said clearly, her voice carrying confidence. The clerk studied her for a moment, then nodded, perhaps sensing the unspoken story behind the design on her arm. "Welcome back, Lieutenant," he said, handing back her documents. Sarah gave a small nod in return, her lips pressing into a line that was almost a smile. She had learned early in her career that first impressions mattered, but not every impression needed her validation. Some people's judgments were shallow, and she had better things to focus on than proving herself to those who didn't understand. As she moved further into the building, more eyes followed. A group of junior sailors whispered to each other, glancing at her tattoo, and then at each other, unsure how to react. Sarah noticed, but instead of feeling self-conscious, she felt a quiet determination. Every symbol on her arm had meaning. Each curve, line, and shadow told a story of missions completed, friends lost, and moments of courage that never made it into reports or headlines. To her, the tattoo wasn't just ink. It was a living memory, a badge of honor worn on her skin. Despite the whispers and stifled laughter, Sarah kept her head high. She reminded herself of why she was here. The naval base wasn't a place to hide or be silent. It was a place to serve, to lead, and to continue the work that mattered. She was back not to please everyone, but to fulfill her duty, and that gave her strength. Her experience, her training, and her quiet confidence made her a force that couldn't be shaken by casual mockery. Sarah's first few hours on the base were a test of patience. She walked the familiar halls, recognizing the faint smell of polished floors mixed with the tang of metal, the sound of boots clattering on hard surfaces, and the low hum of voices discussing missions and schedules. She greeted a few old colleagues, some of whom had matured into more senior roles. They smiled politely, though a few couldn't hide their curiosity about the tattoo. They asked polite questions, careful not to offend, and Sarah answered briefly, keeping the focus on her return and readiness for duty. By midday, she found herself in a small break area, a chance to sit and observe the base more calmly. From her vantage point, she saw the different dynamics at play. The younger sailors still learning the ropes, the officers managing schedules and duties, and the subtle ways in which people judged others based on appearances. It was clear to Sarah that the tattoo had become a silent topic of speculation. Some laughed, some whispered, some stared openly. But she knew that appearances could be deceiving, and that true respect was earned, not given. As she sat there, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. This base, these people, the whispers and mockery, they were part of the test she faced now. It wasn't about avoiding judgment, but about showing character in the face of it. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a surge of resolve. She was back, her purpose clear, and no laughter, no mockery, no misunderstanding of her tattoo could deter her from her mission. Today marked the beginning of her return. Not just physically, but in reclaiming her respect, her place, and her honor among her peers. After her first few hours at the naval base, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes began to notice the reactions of the people around her more clearly. It was one thing to see a few curious glances when she arrived, but now it was becoming more obvious. Some officers and sailors were quietly talking about her, sometimes trying to hide their amusement. Sarah could feel the tension in the air. Some of the younger officers seemed unsure how to treat her. They had never seen someone with a tattoo that told a story of real sacrifice and courage. To them, it looked rebellious or unusual, not understanding the deeper meaning behind it. She walked through the main hall, her boots clicking steadily on the polished floor. The whispers followed her, and she could hear soft chuckles now and then. Some tried to be discreet, but it wasn't always easy in a busy environment where everyone noticed small changes. Sarah noticed it all, but instead of reacting, she remained calm. Years of experience had taught her that composure in the face of judgment was often more powerful than any immediate argument. The people who mocked her didn't know her story, and it wasn't her job to prove herself to them immediately. During her morning briefing, Sarah observed the room carefully. Officers sat in rows, some staring at her arm when they thought she wasn't looking. One of them, trying to make a joke, whispered something about the art project on her forearm. A few others snickered quietly. Sarah felt a small twinge of irritation, but she didn't let it show. She knew that responding angrily or defensively would only make the situation worse. Instead, she straightened her back, held her head high, and focused on the briefing. She had work to do, responsibilities that mattered far more than the opinions of those who didn't understand her. When the briefing ended, Sarah made her way to her assigned office to collect her documents and schedule. On the way, a few junior sailors walked past her and whispered among themselves. They seemed nervous, as if they weren't sure whether they were allowed to speak or look at her tattoo. Sarah noticed their hesitation. She realized that most of them were genuinely curious but didn't know how to express it. Her tattoo, after all, wasn't just a random image. It carried a story of missions completed and comrades she had lost. To them, it was mysterious. Sarah also noticed that some of the senior officers were taking subtle notes, observing her interactions. One older officer approached her desk and greeted her politely. "Lieutenant Hayes, welcome back," he said. There was no laughter or mockery in his voice, just professional respect. Sarah returned the greeting with a nod and a small smile. Even though a few people still mocked or whispered, it was clear that others were beginning to watch her differently, noticing her confidence and composure. Later in the day, Sarah had to attend a meeting with her team. As she entered the room, a few officers tried to make light jokes about her tattoo again, thinking it would embarrass her. One of them murmured, "She really expects us to take her seriously with all that ink?" Another chuckled quietly. Sarah didn't respond with words. Instead, she simply walked to her seat and focused on the documents in front of her. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. She showed them that she wasn't going to let their mockery define her. Her actions and her professionalism were far more important than their immature jokes. During the meeting, she contributed ideas confidently and clearly. Her knowledge and experience shone through every suggestion she made. Slowly, some of those who had been mocking her began to realize that she was not just a figure with an unusual tattoo. They were seeing a capable officer who had faced real challenges and returned to serve with honor. Even the quieter sailors began to notice that there was more to Sarah than met the eye. Her calm demeanor, her clear knowledge of procedures, and her polite but firm interactions all demonstrated that she deserved respect. By afternoon, Sarah found a moment to reflect in a quiet corner of the base. She looked at her tattoo, tracing the lines with her eyes. Each part of it reminded her of a mission, a friend she had lost, a moment of courage in the face of danger. To some people it might look strange or shocking, but to her, it was a reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of duty and honor. She realized that the reactions of others were temporary. They didn't understand the meaning yet, but eventually her actions would speak for themselves. Throughout the day, Sarah began to notice a subtle shift. The laughter was still there, but curiosity had started to replace some of the mockery. A few officers who had initially snickered now glanced at her arm more thoughtfully, as if wondering about the story behind it. Sarah knew that she didn't have to explain immediately. The right moment would come when she could share the meaning of her tattoo with the people who needed to understand. Until then, she would let her work and her behavior speak louder than words. By the end of the day, Sarah had completed her check-ins, attended her meetings, and started to settle back into the rhythm of the base. She had faced the first wave of judgment and mockery, and she had survived it with grace. While some whispers continued, she knew that respect wasn't earned overnight. It was built slowly, through consistent actions, professionalism, and integrity. Sarah felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She was back where she belonged, ready to serve, and determined to let her experience and her honor define her, not the opinions of those who had yet to understand. As the day went on, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes found a quiet moment to reflect on why her tattoo mattered so much to her. To anyone else, it might have looked like just a complex design, a swirl of ink across her forearm. Some saw it as rebellious, strange, or even unprofessional. But for Sarah, every line and symbol told a story, and those stories were tied to the people she had served with and the missions she had survived, and the ones she hadn't. Her tattoo was more than decoration. It was a tribute, a permanent record of bravery, loss, and loyalty. Each element had meaning. The central symbol represented a mission she had led overseas, a mission that had been extremely dangerous and classified. Only a few people in the world even knew it had happened. That mission had tested her skills, her courage, and her leadership. It had been a turning point in her career, but it had also cost her dearly. She had lost teammates she considered family. They had trained together, laughed together, and depended on each other in life or death situations. Losing them was like losing a piece of herself. The smaller symbols around the central design represented those lost comrades. Each one was carefully chosen to reflect their personality or their role in the mission. A star for the navigator who had always kept the team on course, a small anchor for the medic who had saved countless lives, and a flame for the explosive specialist who had been fearless until the end. Sarah had spent hours designing the tattoo with a trusted artist, making sure that each detail was perfect. It wasn't something she did on a whim. It was personal, sacred, and deeply meaningful. Thinking about the reactions she had already encountered at the base, Sarah felt a mix of emotions. Part of her wished people could see beyond the surface and understand the depth of her story. But she also knew that respect and understanding couldn't be forced. People would have to earn the right to know the real meaning of her tattoo. Those who had mocked or whispered weren't necessarily bad people. They simply didn't know. They hadn't experienced the loss, the missions, or the bonds she had formed. They only saw the ink and made assumptions. Sarah remembered one particular night overseas, a night that had changed her life forever. Her team had been caught in a sudden ambush during a covert operation. The sky was dark, and the sounds of gunfire and explosions were all around. She had to make split-second decisions, leading her team through chaos with only her training and instincts to rely on. By the end of the mission, not everyone had made it back. She had carried the weight of those losses with her ever since. The tattoo was her way of keeping their memory alive. Every time she looked at it, she remembered their bravery, their laughter, and the sacrifices they had made together. It was her personal promise to never forget them. Even though she had explained parts of the story to a few trusted colleagues before, most people on the base had no idea. To them, it was just ink, a decoration, or something shocking. that made the mockery she had faced earlier sting even more. But Sarah reminded herself that her tattoo wasn't meant for everyone. It wasn't a tool to impress or to prove herself. It was a deeply personal reminder of her experiences and the people who mattered most to her. Those who understood it would respect it. Those who didn't would have to wait until they had earned the right to know. Later that afternoon, Sarah had a short break and found herself looking at her tattoo in the reflection of a window. She traced the patterns with her eyes, recalling the laughter of her teammates, the tension of dangerous missions, and the grief of losing them. A quiet strength settled over her. The tattoo wasn't just about the past. It was about who she was now. It was a symbol of resilience, courage, and dedication. Every challenge she faced, every whisper or mocking glance at the base, could not diminish what the tattoo represented. Sarah also began thinking strategically. She realized that the mocking and curiosity she had already encountered could be turned into an opportunity. Instead of immediately explaining herself to everyone, she could demonstrate her skill, professionalism, and leadership first. Once people saw her competence and character, the meaning behind the tattoo would carry far more weight. Actions, after all, spoke louder than words. The story of her tattoo would no longer be just a whispered rumor. It would be a testament to her life and service, and people would pay attention when it was shared. By the time she returned to her duties, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The tattoo, once a source of judgment from others, had become a source of inner strength. She walked through the hallways with a quiet confidence, her head held high, knowing that she carried not just ink on her arm, but the memory and spirit of those who had given everything. Every glance, every snicker, every whispered comment was now an opportunity to show her true self through her actions. That evening, as she prepared her reports and reviewed her schedules, Sarah reflected once more on the significance of her tattoo. It was a reminder of courage, loss, and loyalty. It represented a part of her life that no one could take away and no amount of mockery could diminish. She had returned to the base not just to perform her duties, but to honor the memory of her fallen teammates and prove to herself, and eventually to others, that true respect came from actions, not appearances. Sarah went to bed that night with a sense of quiet determination. The next days would bring new challenges, more interactions, and perhaps more judgment. But she knew that her tattoo was more than ink. It was a story, a promise, and a shield of strength that would guide her through every moment of doubt or mockery. It was her past, her honor, and her legacy, and she would carry it proudly, no matter what anyone else thought. By the next morning, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes had settled into the rhythm of the naval base, but the whispers and quiet laughter about her tattoo had not disappeared. In fact, they seemed to have grown bolder. A few officers, perhaps assuming that time had dulled her awareness, began mocking her more openly. It wasn't aggressive or cruel. It was subtle, a joke here, a smirk there, but it was enough to test her patience. Some thought it was harmless, but Sarah knew that disrespect, even in small doses, could affect the morale and professionalism of the base if left unchecked. During a morning briefing, Sarah noticed that one of the more senior officers leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning her forearm with a faint smile that was meant to be teasing. He muttered something under his breath about new art trends in the Navy, expecting laughter from the others around him. A few junior officers chuckled nervously, unsure whether they should join in or remain silent. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She kept her posture straight, her expression calm, and her eyes focused on the briefing materials in front of her. She had learned long ago that reacting impulsively often gave people the satisfaction of control. Today she would wait. After the briefing, the subtle mockery continued in the corridors. Sarah overheard a sailor whisper, "Does she really expect us to take her seriously with all that ink?" Another officer smirked and added, "Looks like she's more concerned with style than duty." It was clear that her tattoo had become a conversation topic, a symbol they didn't understand and, therefore, felt comfortable ridiculing. But Sarah refused to let their assumptions shake her. Instead, she reminded herself that her tattoo was a tribute, not a gimmick, and that those who mocked her were simply unaware of the truth behind it. Throughout the day, Sarah maintained her routine. She attended meetings, reviewed mission reports, and coordinated schedules for her team. She spoke with clarity and confidence, demonstrating her knowledge and skill. While the mockery persisted, more officers began noticing her composure. Her silence in the face of teasing spoke volumes. It was clear she was not easily intimidated. The laughter that was meant to embarrass her gradually began to lose its edge, as people started to sense that she was both experienced and unshakable. During a mid-afternoon drill, Sarah's professionalism became even more apparent. She was assigned to oversee a tactical exercise, coordinating multiple teams in a complex simulation. Every instruction she gave was precise, and every decision was calculated. The officers who had previously whispered jokes now watched her carefully, unable to ignore her competence. Even those who had mocked her earlier couldn't deny her leadership skills. Her actions demonstrated what words could not: experience, dedication, and authority. By the time the drill ended, Sarah noticed a subtle change in the room. Some of the officers who had initially mocked her were quiet now, glancing at her tattoo with curiosity rather than ridicule. They seemed to realize that there was more to the story than they had assumed. It wasn't a frivolous image. It was a symbol of commitment, sacrifice, and experience. Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction. Her silence, her calmness, and her skill had begun to shift perceptions without her needing to argue or explain. Later, during a short break, Sarah sat in the lounge and reflected on the morning's events. She thought about why people mocked her in the first place. Often it was fear of the unknown. People judge what they don't understand, and her tattoo, with its intricate design and hidden meaning, represented something they couldn't immediately grasp. She also realized that their reactions were not personal attacks. They were misguided attempts to categorize her into something familiar. But Sarah had never been ordinary, and she never would be. Her tattoo, her experiences, and her past missions set her apart in ways others would take time to understand. As the day progressed, Sarah had an encounter that highlighted the difference between mockery and respect. A junior officer, who had laughed quietly at her tattoo earlier, approached her cautiously with a question. "Lieutenant Hayes, if you don't mind me asking, what does your tattoo mean?" Sarah looked at him for a moment, noticing the genuine curiosity in his eyes. She smiled faintly, realizing this was the first sign that some people were starting to see beyond appearances. She gave a brief but meaningful answer, sharing a small part of her story. The officer listened intently, nodding with newfound respect. It was a small victory, but it confirmed her belief that actions and integrity often spoke louder than mockery. By evening, Sarah had navigated an entire day filled with subtle judgment, quiet ridicule, and whispered jokes. Yet she remained composed, confident, and focused on her duties. The mockery had not disappeared completely, but its power over her had diminished. She had proven, through her actions and professionalism, that she would not be defined by the assumptions of others. Her tattoo, once a source of curiosity and ridicule, had become a symbol of quiet resilience. As she prepared to leave the office for the day, Sarah realized that the mockery she faced was not just a test of patience. It was a test of character. How she responded would shape not only her reputation but also the respect she would earn over time. She walked through the hallways with her head held high, boots echoing on the polished floor, fully aware of the whispers and glances but undeterred. Every glance that sought to judge her now served as a reminder that she had the power to define herself, not others. That night, as she reviewed reports and prepared for the next day, Sarah reflected on the lessons of the day. The mockery had been inevitable, but it had also been temporary. True respect, she realized, came from consistency, skill, and composure. Her tattoo was not just ink. It was a story, a memory, and a mark of honor. And she knew that in time, those who mocked would come to understand, and those who doubted would learn that courage and professionalism could not be diminished by whispers or laughter. By midweek, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes had begun to understand the unspoken dynamics of the naval base. The laughter and whispers about her tattoo had not stopped entirely, but she could feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. People were starting to notice something they hadn't before. Her calm confidence, her sharp mind, and the quiet authority she carried. The more she focused on her duties, the less the mockery affected her, and the more she realized that actions were far more powerful than words. That morning, she was asked to oversee a complex training drill involving multiple teams working simultaneously. The drill was challenging, requiring split-second decisions, coordination, and leadership under pressure. Sarah approached it with her usual focus, reviewing the objectives carefully and briefing each team on their roles. Her voice was steady and authoritative, leaving no room for confusion. As she walked through the training area, observing the teams and adjusting plans as needed, a few officers who had mocked her earlier watched quietly. They could no longer ignore her skill and composure. During the drill, one team faced a problem. Their communication system failed temporarily, and panic began to ripple through the group. Sarah quickly assessed the situation, issuing clear instructions that helped the team regain control. Her quick thinking prevented a potential failure and ensured that the drill continued smoothly. The officers who had laughed at her tattoo were forced to acknowledge her competence. Their eyes followed her every move, and whispers of "she knows what she's doing" replaced the jokes. It wasn't just her technical skill that impressed people. It was the way she handled the stress. Sarah remained calm, focused, and unflappable, even when minor setbacks occurred. She encouraged her teams without raising her voice unnecessarily, showing patience and leadership that demanded respect naturally. The drill concluded successfully, with all teams achieving their objectives. As the participants gathered for debriefing, Sarah's presence drew silent admiration. Even those who had been quick to mock her before were now paying attention, some exchanging surprised glances as they realized her abilities were far beyond what they had expected. After the drill, a few officers quietly approached her, asking questions about her strategies and decisions. They were no longer trying to tease her or make fun of her tattoo. They wanted to learn. Sarah answered patiently, explaining her thought process and decision-making approach. She realized that by simply performing her duties with professionalism and competence, she had started to change perceptions. Her tattoo, which had been a source of mockery, was now a symbol of curiosity and respect. People were beginning to see her as more than just the ink on her arm. They were seeing the officer behind it. During a break later that afternoon, Sarah reflected on the progress she had made. She understood that the shift wasn't immediate. Respect takes time. But she could feel it growing, small changes in behavior and attitude that indicated her colleagues were starting to see her differently. The subtle smiles, the respectful nods, the questions asked with genuine interest, all of it reinforced that patience and professionalism were far more effective than confrontation. Sarah felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She didn't need to prove herself with words or explanations. Her actions spoke louder than anything else. That day, a junior officer who had previously snickered at her tattoo approached her hesitantly. "Lieutenant Hayes," he began. I didn't understand your tattoo before, but after watching you today, I realize it must mean something important." Sarah looked at him, her expression calm but kind. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his sincerity. "It does," she said quietly. "One day when you're ready, I'll tell you the story." The young officer smiled, clearly impressed, and walked away with a newfound respect. It was a small moment, but it reinforced Sarah's belief that patience and quiet strength often taught more than confrontation ever could. As the evening approached, Sarah walked through the base corridors, observing the changes around her. The mockery hadn't completely disappeared, but the atmosphere had shifted. Officers who had previously whispered jokes now nodded politely as she passed. Some still stared at her tattoo, but the looks were no longer mocking. They were curious, thoughtful, and even admiring. Sarah realized that her presence and competence had transformed perceptions more effectively than any argument or explanation could have. Her tattoo, once a focal point of judgment, had become a silent conversation starter. People were no longer laughing, they were noticing. They were asking questions quietly, wondering about the story behind it, and starting to see her as someone worthy of respect and attention. Sarah understood that true respect didn't come from immediate recognition. It came from consistency, professionalism, and the courage to remain calm under scrutiny. That night, As she reviewed mission reports and planned for the next day, Sarah felt a sense of quiet pride. She had navigated a day filled with judgment, whispers, and subtle mockery without losing her composure. She had proven, through her actions, that her tattoo was not a symbol of rebellion but a mark of honor and courage. Her colleagues were starting to see her not just as a tattooed officer, but as a skilled, capable, and experienced leader. By the time she prepared for bed, Sarah knew that the days ahead would continue to test her, but she was ready. She had learned that patience, quiet strength, and professional excellence were far more powerful than ridicule. The tattoo on her arm, once a source of judgment, had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and experience. Through her actions, Sarah had begun to turn mockery into admiration, and curiosity into respect. She knew that this was just the beginning. Her story was far from over, and the base had only just begun to see the depth of the officer who wore that tattoo with pride. A few days after her return, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes began to notice a change that went beyond the curiosity and quiet respect of her peers. There was someone else observing her closely now, someone whose attention carried authority and weight, the general of the naval base. He was a tall, imposing figure, known for his sharp mind and uncompromising standards. Few officers had the courage to disagree with him, and even fewer could capture his notice without merit. Sarah, however, found herself in his line of sight, and she could sense that something significant was about to happen. It began during a routine inspection. The general walked through the hallways, his polished boots echoing against the concrete floor. Officers stood at attention as he passed, each one careful to meet his gaze with respect. When he reached the training area, Sarah was overseeing a small tactical drill with her team. The general paused, his eyes sweeping over the scene, then rested on her. For a moment there was silence. It was not the silence of fear but of evaluation. He was studying her, noting her demeanor, her posture, her focus. Sarah noticed his gaze but remained completely calm. She didn't alter her behavior or try to impress him with theatrics. Years of experience had taught her that true leadership showed itself naturally, not through forced displays. She continued giving instructions to her team, maintaining her usual balance of authority and patience. The general walked closer, watching as she coordinated the drill, and Sarah felt a quiet confidence growing inside her. She knew that competence and composure would speak far louder than any explanations she could give. After the drill concluded, the general requested a brief private meeting with her. In a small, quiet office, away from the eyes of other officers, he sat across from Sarah, studying her carefully. His gaze finally drifted to her tattoo, the intricate design on her forearm that had been the source of whispers and mockery. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "Lieutenant Hayes, may I ask about your tattoo?" His tone was curious, not judgmental. There was a weight in his voice that made it clear this was not casual curiosity. It was genuine interest, combined with the authority of someone who demanded understanding before forming an opinion. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind reflecting on the journey that led her to this moment. She spoke quietly with clarity and pride. "Sir, this tattoo represents my team and the missions we've completed together," she explained. "Each symbol honors a teammate we lost during a classified mission overseas. It's a way for me to remember their courage and sacrifice, and to keep their memory alive in my daily life." The general listened silently, leaning back in his chair, his hands folded on the desk. There was a moment of pause as he absorbed her words. Sarah could feel the weight of his scrutiny, but she remained composed, letting the meaning of her tattoo speak for itself. She didn't exaggerate, didn't seek sympathy, and didn't demand respect. She simply told the truth, honestly and respectfully, knowing that the story behind her tattoo carried more power than any argument or defense could. Finally, the general nodded slowly, a faint expression of approval crossing his face. "I see," he said. "It takes courage to honor your team in such a permanent and visible way. And it takes even more courage to return here, under scrutiny, and continue serving with dignity." His words were measured, but they carried a weight that resonated deeply with Sarah. This was the first time someone of such rank had acknowledged not just her tattoo, but the life and sacrifice behind it. As the conversation continued, the general asked her about the missions she had been part of, the challenges she had faced, and the decisions she had had to make under pressure. Sarah answered each question with clarity, honesty, and humility, never exaggerating her role but never downplaying her contributions either. The general listened intently, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking for more details. By the end of their meeting, it was clear that he had a newfound respect for her, not just for the tattoo or the story behind it, but for the officer she had become through her experiences. When the meeting concluded, the general stood and extended his hand. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, "your dedication and integrity are commendable. I respect the way you carry yourself and the way you honor your team. Keep leading with the same strength and commitment." Sarah shook his hand, feeling a sense of validation and pride that went beyond personal achievement. This was more than recognition. It was a signal that her actions, her patience, and her integrity had earned the respect of one of the most influential figures on the base. As she left the office, Sarah noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere among her peers. Word of the general's private acknowledgement spread quietly, and whispers about her tattoo changed tone. Where there had been judgment and curiosity, there was now respect and admiration. Officers who had laughed or snickered before began to approach her with politeness, asking questions not out of mockery, but out of genuine interest and respect. By the end of the day, Sarah reflected on the significance of what had happened. The general's attention had not only validated her personal story, but it had also set the stage for a broader change in perception at the base. Her tattoo, once a source of whispers and mockery, had become a symbol of courage and honor in the eyes of those who mattered most. More importantly, she had remained herself, calm, professional, and dignified throughout the scrutiny. As she prepared for the evening, Sarah felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She realized that respect was not something demanded. It was earned through actions, integrity, and composure. Her tattoo, her story, and her service had finally been recognized by someone whose opinion carried immense weight. And she knew that this recognition would not only change the way her peers saw her, but also reinforce her own belief in the power of quiet courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment to duty. The next morning at the naval base felt different to Lieutenant Sarah Hayes. She had returned a few days ago to whispers, laughter, and judgment, but now there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Officers and sailors moved with a little more caution around her, some exchanging quiet glances that seemed to say, "She is not someone to underestimate." Sarah, however, did not let this attention distract her. She remained focused on her duties, knowing that respect was earned through action, not words. It wasn't long before the general, whose quiet recognition of her tattoo and her service had already left an impression, decided to make a public acknowledgement. A base gathering was scheduled, a routine assembly for announcements and briefings, but the general used this opportunity to address the officers directly. Lieutenant Hayes was asked to be present, and as she stepped into the room, she felt the usual mixture of curiosity and caution from her peers. Whispers still floated through the air, but this time they carried uncertainty rather than mockery. The general began his address, first discussing routine matters, then moving to a topic that captured everyone's attention. He spoke about dedication, courage, and the importance of honoring the sacrifices of service members. Then his gaze fell on Sarah, and the room fell into a respectful silence. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, his voice steady and commanding, "has returned to our base after serving in challenging missions overseas. Her actions, her courage, and her dedication reflect the highest standards of our service." All eyes turned to Sarah, and she felt a mix of humility and pride. She stood quietly, her posture straight, her face calm, as the general continued. "Many of you may have noticed the tattoo she wears on her arm," he said. "It is more than ink. It is a story. Each symbol represents a life lost, a mission completed, and a promise kept. It honors her fallen comrades and reminds us all of the sacrifices made for our country." A ripple of surprise and admiration went through the room. Officers who had previously mocked her tattoo shifted uncomfortably, realizing that they had misunderstood its significance. The laughter and whispers that had once followed her were replaced by silence and reflection. Some glanced at each other, their expressions a mix of embarrassment and awe. Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the recognition was not just for her tattoo, but for the life and service it represented. The general continued, emphasizing the importance of integrity and leadership. Lieutenant Hayes has returned not for recognition, but to serve, to lead, and to uphold the values we all strive to maintain. Her example reminds us that true courage is not always loud or flashy. It is steady, unwavering, and rooted in honor. His words resonated through the room, and Sarah's peers began to see her in a new light. The mockery that had once defined their perception was replaced by respect and admiration. After the speech, the general called Sarah forward and asked everyone to give her a proper salute. Officers and sailors alike stood, some still quietly astonished, and saluted her with genuine respect. It was a powerful moment, one that made it clear she had earned her place and the recognition she deserved. For those who had mocked her, it was a humbling experience. They realized that their assumptions had been shallow and uninformed, and that courage and honor could not be judged by appearances alone. Sarah accepted the salute with quiet dignity. She had never sought attention or praise, but standing there, she understood the importance of recognition, not for herself, but for the message it sent about honor, integrity, and respect. The gathering ended, but the impact lingered. Officers who had once laughed were now thoughtful, reflecting on the lessons they had learned. They saw that respect was earned through character and action, not through jokes or superficial judgments. Later, in the quiet of her office, Sarah reflected on what had happened. She thought about the journey of the past few days, the arrival at the base, the whispers, the mockery, and the slow transformation of perception. Her tattoo, once a symbol that attracted ridicule, had become a representation of resilience, courage, and remembrance. The general's public acknowledgement had changed everything. It wasn't just about her story. It was about showing the entire base the importance of honoring experience, sacrifice, and dedication. Sarah also considered the officers who had mocked her. She didn't feel anger or resentment. Instead, she felt hope that they had learned an important lesson, that judgment without understanding was shallow, and that true respect came from recognizing the character and achievements of others. She hoped that in time, their behavior would reflect the lesson they had been given, and that they too would understand the meaning behind courage and dedication. By evening, Sarah walked through the base with a sense of quiet accomplishment. Officers and sailors nodded respectfully as she passed, some even offering smiles of acknowledgement. The transformation was clear. The mockery that had once followed her every step had faded, replaced by respect and admiration. Her tattoo, which had once been misunderstood, was now a symbol of her story, her honor, and her resilience. That night, as she prepared for rest, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The turning point had come, not through confrontation, but through patience, professionalism, and unwavering commitment to her duties. Her actions and the integrity she demonstrated had spoken louder than any mockery ever could. She had earned her respect, not by proving herself with words, but by living the values she believed in. For Sarah, the general's acknowledgement was more than recognition. It was a reminder that courage, honor, and respect were intertwined, and that sometimes the quietest and most patient approach could achieve the greatest impact. She had faced judgment, whispers, and misunderstanding, and she had emerged stronger, respected, and admired, not for appearances, but for the strength of her character and the depth of her service. After the general's public acknowledgement, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes began to feel a profound change at the naval base. The whispers, laughter, and judgment that had greeted her arrival were now replaced with respect, curiosity, and admiration. Officers and sailors who had once mocked her tattoo walked past with polite nods. Some even stopped to ask questions, eager to understand the story behind the intricate ink that Sarah wore proudly on her arm. It was a transformation she had patiently worked toward, not with words, but through her actions, her professionalism, and her calm confidence. The day started with routine assignments, but Sarah could feel the shift in the energy around her. Where there had once been snickers and sideways glances, there were now attentive stares and quiet acknowledgement. Junior officers who had previously whispered jokes now approached her with a level of respect that had been absent before. Some asked about her experiences, her leadership strategies, and the missions she had undertaken overseas. Sarah answered each question with humility, never boasting, but her honesty and clarity commanded attention. During a mid-morning drill, she led her team with the same precision and authority as always. But this time, the effect was different. The teams responded quickly to her commands, motivated not by fear of authority but by admiration for her skills and calm composure. Even officers who had previously mocked her tattoo now followed her instructions closely, silently acknowledging the experience and wisdom she brought to the task. Sarah noticed the subtle change and felt a quiet satisfaction. Respect, she realized, had finally taken root. By early afternoon, the base began to hum with discussions about Sarah's story. The general's public acknowledgement had set a tone that could not be ignored. Officers who had doubted her abilities now regarded her with a mix of awe and humility. Conversations that once included casual jokes about her appearance now shifted to discussions of strategy, leadership, and the challenges of naval missions. Sarah's tattoo, once a source of ridicule, had become a symbol of resilience and honor, a visible reminder of the courage and sacrifices behind it. A few officers, who had been among the loudest mockers, approached her privately. Their faces were red with embarrassment, and they spoke cautiously. "Lieutenant Hayes," one began, we didn't understand before, but we see now what it represents. I'm sorry for how we reacted." Sarah listened, her expression calm but kind. She didn't dwell on their past behavior or seek apologies. Instead, she acknowledged their sincerity with a nod. "Thank you," she said simply. "It's never too late to understand. What matters is what we do from here." Their relief was evident, and Sarah realized that her patience had taught a powerful lesson. Respect could be earned not through confrontation, but through consistent professionalism and integrity. Later in the day, the general made his rounds again. When he saw Sarah walking through the base, he paused and approached her personally. "Ma'am," he said, offering a firm salute. "Welcome back." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. It wasn't just a greeting. It was a recognition of her service, her courage, and the respect she had earned from everyone at the base. Sarah returned the salute, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. She had returned not just physically, but with her honor and dignity fully intact. As she continued her rounds, officers and sailors nodded respectfully, some offering quiet smiles of acknowledgement. Sarah felt the impact of the general's words radiating through the base. The environment had shifted from judgment to respect, from whispers to admiration. She could see that her presence, combined with her actions and composure, had changed perceptions not just about her tattoo, but about the way officers should approach courage, sacrifice, and professionalism. During a short break in the afternoon, Sarah reflected on the journey of the past few days. She thought about the arrival filled with whispers and mockery, the quiet resilience she had maintained, and the eventual recognition from both peers and the general. She realized that the tattoo was never just about the ink on her arm. It was about the story it carried and the values it represented. Every glance, every whisper, every moment of doubt from others had been an opportunity for her to demonstrate strength and character. By evening, Sarah found herself walking through the base one last time before returning to her quarters. The atmosphere was completely different from her first day back. Officers who had once whispered or laughed now greeted her with respect. Junior sailors who had been unsure how to react now approached her with curiosity and admiration. Even those who had mocked her the most had learned a valuable lesson about courage, humility, and the importance of understanding before judgment. As she paused near the base entrance, Sarah allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. Her tattoo, once a symbol that invited ridicule, was now recognized as a mark of honor. The general's salute and words, "Ma'am, welcome back," were not just a greeting. They were a testament to the power of patience, integrity, and unwavering professionalism. She had turned skepticism into respect, whispers into admiration, and mockery into acknowledgement, simply by remaining true to herself and her values. That night, Sarah prepared for rest with a deep sense of fulfillment. She knew that the days ahead would bring new challenges, but she also knew that she had earned the respect of her peers and leaders. The journey from ridicule to recognition had been long, but it had reinforced a truth she had always believed. Respect is earned through action, patience, and integrity, not through appearances or instant approval. As she lay down, she thought of her fallen comrades, the missions that had shaped her, and the tattoo that carried their memory. Their sacrifice had guided her, strengthened her, and reminded her of why she served. And now, surrounded by respect and acknowledgement, she felt a quiet pride, not in the attention, but in knowing that courage, honor, and dedication had been recognized and valued. The mockers had learned, the curious had understood, and the general had confirmed it all with his salute. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes had returned, not just as an officer, but as a symbol of resilience, courage, and unwavering integrity.